good morning. I decided to go with my Bahama look today. I just go outside and I sit too close to a lamp and I get a tan. So I can't really brag about it. I've just been mowing my lawn is the truth, right? But I'm glad you're here. It's nice that it's sunny outside. Glad that you're here. Just want to invite you to come with me and just take a journey. We're going to look at a great biblical passage today, and I hope you leave just that much more encouraged about your faith and about just living it out in front of people. So why don't we just bow our heads for a word of prayer first, shall we? Father, I want to thank you so much for the gift of song and music. It has a way of just drawing us all in together. It's one of the few times in this life that everyone actually sings off of the same page. These truths, they have a way of, if we allow them to not only swim around in our brains, but to sink down deeply into our hearts, motivating us, Lord, to be the kind of people that you have called us to be. And I just pray, Lord, that kind of transformation would take place whenever we gather together, that we're challenged by these truths, not to make excuses, but to honestly deal with those sides of us that just need to be transformed, more into the image of Jesus. So I just pray that you would use our time of worship together towards that end, and that you would receive all the glory for it. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. We've been involved in a series called The Ripple Effect. It's been a series where we have been taking a look at a number of instances where Jesus has engaged individuals and he has created ripples in their life. The work of Jesus in their life has so impacted them that it began to spill over into someone that they came in contact with, and so on and so on. So it changed the whole course of their life, not only for the present, but for the future as well. And so that's what we've been engaged in as we've been trying to look at these stories. And in the midst of the stories, to provide some kind of sound reasoning as to why we should place our hope in Jesus. Looking at these stories, they're a way of just uncovering, again, what is at the foundation of what we believe and why is that so important? Now, we know that there is a number of obstacles that get in the way. Life is like that. We've looked at that in the scriptures already. A number of these people had to face challenges that could have just kept them on the sidelines. But now, as a result of their interaction with Jesus and their transformation that took place, things have changed for them. And so we saw that with a Samaritan woman who, burdened with some of just life's, cares, she meets Jesus, and the next thing you know, she's been promised this drink of living water. Or the paralytic, 38 years paralyzed, and Jesus touches his body, but then calls him to walk in righteousness. Or the man born blind, and Jesus gives him sight so that he no longer has to stumble around in the dark, but walk in the light of God's promises. And all of those stories, they begin to spill over, they change the lives of others, and the next thing you know, a person's life is on a completely different course. I want to talk to you about today, in the last of the sermons in this series, on something that I think is probably the greatest obstacle that we'll ever have to face when it comes to our faith. It has to deal with the loss of loved ones. I've been pastoring at Bethany now for over 18 years, and it puts you in contact with a lot of different people. And just preaching this sermon, I look out on a congregation and I can look into the faces of men and women, just last service alone. And to my right, there was a man who lost his wife in her middle 50s to uterine cancer. On this side, there was a young man whose baby died after just a few months. There was another gentleman in the back who was married for 62 years, and he lost his wife. So what I'm talking about today, it really lands the plane where people live. This is a hardship that very often just causes us sometimes to put our faith on pause and just go on with life trying to find comfort in other places. And I'll just be straight up. If this Jesus isn't the one who is able to stand in the midst of those kinds of struggles and trials and make a difference, then hey, buy a boat. Do something different. Don't waste your time. In fact, don't buy a boat. Make a friend that has a boat, and you'll save yourself a whole lot of money in the process. That's how serious I am. I think like taking these passages seriously, we are given a very sound wisdom how to apply to the various obstacles that we're going to face in this life, and to do it with victory. So there's a man by the name of George Santayana. He's a poet, and he wrote a poem called "With You, a Part of Me." In this poem, he tries to give expression to this grief that we experience. He tried to uncover something of the pain that we feel in just trying to move forward. And so I'd like for you to read these words as I read them aloud to you. He says, "With you, a part of me has passed away. For in the peopled forest of my mind, a tree made leafless by this wintry wind shall never don again its green array. Chapel and fireside, country road and bay, they have something of their friendliness resigned. Another, if I would, I could not find, and I am grown much older in a day. But yet, I treasure in my memory your gift of charity and young heart's ease and the dear honor of your amity. For these once mine, my life is rich with these. And I scarce know which part may greater be, what I keep of you or you rob from me." If you have lost a loved one, these words don't need an interpretation. They speak to your everyday kind of experience of trying to wed this loss and these memories and try to bring some healing so that you can move forward. And there's 1,001 trigger points in the course of a day that just brings those memories back to mind. And I was made painfully aware of this just to see my dad, career Marine. He doesn't own an article of clothing that doesn't have the Marine Corps insignia on it. He's probably the toughest dude that I know. Married 62 years to my mother, and when my mom passed away from Alzheimer's, my dad would spend days in his house, and I would try to call him, and I could tell that he had been crying. And it was so hard to see this really tough guy and how he was dealing with the loss of my mom. And it was a process. So I get this. It is not an easy thing. But I'm here to tell you that Jesus can even meet us in these circumstances. And so, as a result of this poem, it made me think of the story of Lazarus. I'm sure you're familiar with that story, but it's a story of resurrection. It's a story that I believe contains a powerful answer to the question, why should we place our hope in Jesus? And I hope by the time we're done with this story that you would agree that this is a good move. So if you came in this morning, you were given some sermon notes. It's our way of just helping you to just follow along in the passage itself, taking out some of those salient points, and then just made 2 or 3 observations that maybe in reflection you can take these along with you as well. So John chapter 11, verse 1 says, "Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters, they sent word to Jesus, 'Lord, the one you love is sick.' When he heard this, Jesus said, 'This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of Man may be glorified through it.' Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Yet when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Then he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you're going to go back there? And Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? A man who walks by day will not stumble, for he sees by this world's light. It is when he walks by night that he stumbles, for he has no light. Now, when you read a passage like this, it's just narrative, right? It's just a story. But these words have been penned so that they are going to reveal something to us of not only the circumstances of which we're reading, but something about the God that we're serving. And so I just want you to recognize that what we're about to discover here is that Jesus is showing us a way to confront some of the obstacles to one's faith. And so just write that word obstacles in your notes, because I want to just underscore 2 of these that just jump off the page. The first one here is that we're talking about sickness and death. 2 of the most premier things that we dread the most. When you're feeling really healthy, you hope that that train just keeps on moving. And all you need to do is begin to recognize some of those weaknesses, and it's hard to contend with sometimes, isn't it? I always kid, now that I'm getting a little older, I have these friends, they all get together and it's like an organ recital. You know, like this is gone, that needs work, this shoulder needs, I'm like, whoa, guys, easy. But it's true, right? It affects us all. I had an opportunity, I was at McDonald's, and it was early in the morning, it was about 6:30 in the morning, and I brought my laptop. I just wanted to get a cup of coffee, get a couple of things done, and I'm sitting there, and time passed by about an hour and a half, and now it's closer to 8 o'clock, and all of a sudden, all these disabled children were brought in for their outing to McDonald's. And these caregivers were wheeling these kids in, and there had to be a little bit more than a dozen of them. But with their caretakers, it was like about 40 people that just showed up at the restaurant. And I sat there, and I looked as child after child was just wheeled over, and they're all excited because they're going to McDonald's. And I thought to myself, it's been a long time since I just sat in an environment and just saw so much brokenness. Yeah, there was joy in these kids' lives, but I have 4 strong boys. And I am thinking, oh, God, like this is so hard. I wish you had the power of an apostle just to reach over and touch a child on its shoulder and watch him jump up out of that wheelchair. It's hard, man. Life, right? It's hard. There's signs of brokenness all around us. If you take the Bible seriously, it says it's a result of a fall. It's not that God designed the world this way. He created it so that there would be perfect harmony, that it would feed itself, that the birds of the air and the vegetation, it would live in harmony with one another. And then a fall comes and this rift exists, and the next thing you know, there are these signs of our own mortality that are being seen everywhere we look. We can't escape it. But one of the things that I've noticed about sickness and death, it has a way of acting as an instigator to cause us to look for hope outside of ourselves and, quite frankly, outside of the capability of this world. Let someone you love get sick, and you're on your face, oh, God, do something. Because you recognize in that moment, I have nothing. You would do it. My father would have, in a heartbeat, traded places, but it wasn't meant to be that way. And he fought it all the way through. My mom, she could barely walk and swallow, but he had these 5 little restaurants that he had made friends with, and they would give him a little table, and he would get my mom up, take extra clothes, bring her in, wheel her in, sit her there, not knowing where she was or who he was. Bring extra clothes in case she had an accident. And every day he'd come back and he'd just be, oh, God, just do something. So that's one of those obstacles to faith, right? Sometimes it's hard for people to get beyond that. Here's another one. Notice when Jesus says, look, I want to go back to Judea now. The text says that the disciples turned to him and said, wait, why do you want to do that for? The last time we were there, they tried to kill you. And there are a number of instances you read in John chapter 8 and 10 where the people took such offense to Jesus' declaration that he was the Son of God that this outburst of hate and violence, man, was just so palpable they wound up leaving. And now Jesus says, no, it's time to go back. You know, when you look at this world, there are the telltale signs of its brokenness, right? But there is a passage, and you can write this down. It's in Galatians chapter 5. And in Galatians chapter 5, there is this text that talks about the works of the flesh in comparison to the fruit of the Spirit that now resides in us. The acts of the flesh, he says, were this. And this is just a small summary of some of the things that he writes. But he says, the works of the flesh are hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, envy. And the list goes on. But think about some of these here. Discord, jealousies, fits of rage, selfish ambition. How do they play themselves out in our homes, in our communities, in our world? Somebody becomes envious of someone else, and next thing you know, they conjure up these plans to bring some kind of retribution. They have this selfish ambition that just steps on everybody all around them. These fits of rage that could result in someone's loss of life or being maimed for a long time. For what purpose? For what reason? It just doesn't make any sense. And if you're a thinking person, you sit there and you go, well, how are we going to deal with that? Where's Jesus when all this stuff is going on? It becomes an obstacle to faith. But if we're going to place our hope in Jesus, we're going to have to find an answer to that. And Jesus is going to show us how to confront that. And he does, if you look at the text a little closer. Before we do, listen to this one text in Galatians 5:15. He says, if you keep on biting and devouring each other, watch out or you will be destroyed by each other. See, the consequence of the works of the flesh, it's a bad one. It says if you keep devouring each other, you're going to destroy each other. Nobody, I think, needs to have that proven to them in the world in which we're living. So how do you confront the obstacles to faith? Well, I want you to understand that Jesus now is about to share with us an understanding of the way to faith. How is it that we're going to get there? And it has everything to do with renewing one's mind. So, for instance, Jesus now is going to reveal to them something of his purpose, God's purpose. That's one thing that you have to take a look at. Somehow or another, we have to take not just be so engrossed in this one situation that we lose sight of the bigger picture. When Jesus says to his disciples, this sickness will not end in death, but it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it, he's saying to his disciples and anyone who is listening, there is a purpose to this. Lazarus' sickness, there is a meaning beyond this. You may not see it right now, but I'm telling you that this is going to result not only in God being glorified, but the Son of God glorified through it. So now why would there be this sense of glory, not only for the God who is unseen, but for this God who we do see? It's so that we would have this indelibly branded into our minds and our hearts that when the Father, his will is displayed, his purposes are made known, the Son of God is the one who is out to fulfill that. There is no shadow or any light between God the Father and God the Son. If you've seen the Son, you've seen the Father. If you see the Father, you've seen the Son. Whatever it is that the Son is going to do is exactly what the Father would do. And in this case here, what's going to transpire in the raising of Lazarus from the dead is a revelation into what God and God alone can do. Bring life to death. And so, how often do we sometimes lose our way? But Jesus is saying to his disciples, pay attention, because God has a purpose and we are a part of that purpose, because I have power over life and death. And the motivation, the purpose for which God is now engaging a broken world, well, you know the answer to that. It's as easy as the text from John 3:16. It says, God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him would not perish but have eternal life. The motivating factor was love. God saw a broken world and he sent his son to redeem it. And so this situation of Lazarus and this sickness that has come, it's part of this larger fabric, and God's saying, no, there is a purpose here, and you are about to see something where not only God will be glorified, but the Son of God will be glorified through it. But there's something more, because it's not only about God's purpose, but also about his will. Okay, so now why do I say that? Remember when he said, let's go back to Judea? And they said, hey, we can't do that, man. The people are after you. They want to kill you. What does he say? He tells them, he says, look, is there not 12 hours of daylight? If a man walks by this world's light, he's not going to stumble because he walks by the light of the day. It's only if he walks in darkness that he's going to stumble. He's using the metaphor of the light of this world for God's will. Jesus is saying, look, I've come to do the work of the Father. I am walking in the center of his will. There is no darkness in that. I am not going to stumble because I am doing his will and his purpose. I'm not worried about these people in Judea. There is nothing that they're going to do that in any way is going to stave off the purposes for which God has designed it. And sometimes, though, we're looking back and we just see the calamity that's taking place, but sometimes God's movements, they're a little bit more obscured and we don't see them quite plainly, but God is making a case that his will never be thwarted. And Jesus is saying, look, they're not going to do anything to me. Now, yes, his life will be taken. He will be crucified on that tree, but here's a news flash. Jesus said about that from the beginning of his ministry. He said that's why he came, to lay down his life, a ransom for the sins of man. He will tell them, I am the good shepherd. I lay down my life for the sheep. No one has authority over my life. I lay it down and I take it up. Because I am the way, the truth, and the life, and the only way to the Father is through me. So now you begin to see, you want to know how do we attack these obstacles to our faith. Jesus is saying, be conscious of the purposes of God and his will. Because that's something that will give us strength in the midst of the struggle. But there's something even more here I want you to take a look at. There's another obstacle here that I think has the potential to derail this faith journey that we're on. It's found in verses 5 and 6, actually. If you look there, it starts this way. It says, Jesus loved Martha, her sister, and Lazarus. Yet when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Okay, this text always bothered me. It bothers me because look what it says. It says Jesus loved, and he heard. It wasn't like he said, oh, I didn't get the message, sorry. No, he heard, and then he stayed where he was 2 more days. See, this text bothers me a bit because those declarations, they don't fit easily together. When you love, aren't you supposed to act? If you find this sense of need, aren't you supposed to stand in that gap and try and resolve that? Why would he stay 2 more days? That whole situation was now exacerbated. But if you think about God's purpose and God's will, then before we act too quickly to condemn his inactivity, maybe we ought to just stop for a moment and try and look at it from a different perspective. Because I would venture to say that there are many times that we have found ourselves in circumstances that we don't really like, that we would much rather fast forward, and we're saying, come on, God, I already told you. I know you're listening. Why aren't you acting? And in the midst of that, if we're not careful, we begin to develop a callus over our heart, and the next thing you know, you're saying, I'm done. I'm checking out. And then they do find a friend with a boat. Or they play golf badly. So what's the answer here? Let me change the metaphors here a little bit. I like to cook. Truth is, I like to eat. And if you like to eat, it helps if you like to cook. And so I enjoy, cooking. We go out on our family vacations, and I probably do about 90% of the cooking. I like it. I don't need to be out in the sun that long. But my wife, she gets all these books that have all these recipes, like Southern cooking and, cuisine at home, Bon Appetit. I mean, I got Epicurious, this little app on my phone. I'm always pulling that sucker up, like, okay, this is what I have in the fridge. What can I make with that? I love doing that. Every once in a while, like if I'm the kind of guy that if I get this recipe, I have to put out all the ingredients, right? Because I just like having it all there, so I make my little measurements and then I go at it. Every once in a while, you start getting these ingredients and you're like, I have no idea what, like marjoram? What the heck is that? I remember the first time I saw this cumin. And you smell it and you put your little finger in there and taste it. It's kind of smoky, right? Not too bad. One recipe called for this like Chinese kind of pepper, and I didn't even know what the name was. And I'm like, what the heck is that? And I take a little taste of that. Yeah, bad idea. That thing was hot, man. There's a bunch of spices like that. You taste them on their own, and it's terrible. You just want to spit it out of your mouth. Like, come on, who walks around just chewing a whole clove of garlic? But you take that garlic, you mix in a little cumin, you take a little, 2 of those packages of Sazon, a little bit of vinegar, squeeze a little lemon juice in there, a little salt and pepper, a dash of little oregano, mix that sucker all up with a bunch of cloves of garlic, and wrap that over a round of a nice pork butt, put it in the oven for about 5 hours. Come on now. Everybody's hungry now. Okay, so now why am I talking about that? Because see, in your life, sometimes you look and the table's set, man, and there is disappointment. And there's some heartbreak. There's pain, and throw in a couple of dashes of shame and guilt. And the next thing you know, man, this table is set, and any one of those things by themselves, it's not good. But Jesus says, you know what, you give me your heart, and then I'll mix all these things together. And I'll make something for you that at the end you'll say, hey, I tasted and seen that the Lord is good. Well, that's what's happening here. You can't hit the pause button just because Jesus stayed where he was 2 days without knowing why did he stay there 2 days. You can't just give up on Jesus just because you didn't get your way in a particular spot. And I know it's not just like a little thing. Sometimes it's a big thing, but your life is a big thing. You only have so much sand in the hourglass, and then what? So don't judge the whole thing by one episode. You have to go back to God's purposes and God's will, and what is he doing with all of that? That's why I just bring you back then to this passage, because look in verse 20. It says, when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now, come on, how many of us would not say that? Of course you would say that. I sent word, Lazarus was sick. The one you love is sick. And it took such a delay that the text tells us that Lazarus was in the tomb now 4 days. And now Jesus shows up and they're saying, look, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Jesus says, your brother will rise again. She goes, I know he's going to rise again in the resurrection. But see, she's looking out there in the sweet by and by, not realizing that who she's talking to is the Son of God, the second person of the Trinity. And he looks at her and says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. That's different than saying, you'll rise in the resurrection. Jesus is saying to her, I have the power of that resurrection. Now, in all fairness, come on, like, would you just accept that? Jesus asked her, do you believe this? And she says, yes, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of God, right? Who has come into this world. But it's one thing to say that with your lips. It's another thing to believe that deeply in your heart. And so if we're going to confront the obstacles to this faith, if we're really going to understand something of the way to faith, then we're going to have a certainty of faith. Because this has to be bedrock for you. And now you begin to get an idea why the story is written the way it is. Think about this. Was God's timing really the issue? So when she says, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, is that really true? Was Jesus constrained by geography? Is Jesus constrained by circumstances? Jesus already had related to the disciples that this sickness is not going to end up in death. Now, granted, Mary and Martha didn't know that. Lazarus didn't know that. But you know, there's a story in the Bible where there is this Roman centurion, a Roman soldier who has authority over 100 men. He's a Gentile, and he comes to Jesus, and he says, my servant is sick. And Jesus then says, okay, look, I'll go with you. And he looks at Jesus and says, no, you don't have to come. He says, I'm a man of authority. I say to this soldier, go here, and he goes. I tell this soldier, come here, and he comes. All you have to do is say that word, and I know my servant will be healed. Jesus looks around, and he says to all who were within earshot, he says, surely I have not seen such greater faith in all of Israel. Because see, that guy got it. He understood that in the person of Jesus, there was power. He didn't have to be there. He didn't have to, everything had to collide at the same time. He could have healed Lazarus, which then leads me to this other point and saying the fact that he didn't show up, how did that roll itself out? Think about that one for a moment, because that's not a really good thought. By delaying all those days, Lazarus is dead. Was it good for Lazarus? Whatever it was that he was experiencing in that sickness, it eventually caused his death. What else did it do? Well, now everybody that's familiar with Lazarus, his sisters, probably other family members and friends, now they have to deal with the sting of that death. And we find them 4 days later still sitting around in the house, grieving the loss. And not only that, they had to wallow in the reality that they were powerless to do anything about it. Now, Jesus could have changed all of that. He could have just told him to get up and be well. But he didn't. And all those things happened. You ever think why? He gave you a clue. He said that God will be glorified and the Son of God will be glorified through this. He said, I'm walking in the center of God's will. Because you see, the death of Lazarus and the pain that everybody experienced, it just brought everyone to this place of this utter hopelessness, staring in the face the very enemy of all mankind, because nobody escapes death. And now Jesus has created a platform for himself. He wanted them to understand what the psalmist had said many centuries ago, that even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. And now the stage is set. And he's telling them that if they believe in him, they will live even though they die. And whoever lives and believes in him will never die. The promises of life in the present and life eternal, wrapped up in the person of Jesus. So now look in the remainder of your text. Verse 32, it says, when Mary reached the place where Jesus was, this is Martha's sister, she saw Jesus, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. It's the same thing as a sister. It's a common. But notice what happens. It says, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And Jesus wept. You know, the Bible is made up of 1,189 chapters. It has more than 31,173 verses. This verse, Jesus wept, is the shortest verse in the whole Bible. There was a Frenchman by the name of Robert Stevens about 400 years ago that put chapter and verse to the Bible. I wonder what was going on in his head when he took these two words and decided that would be a verse all of its own. But so now I want you to think about it for a minute. Jesus wept. Why did he weep? You might reflexively just say, well, hey, Lazarus is dead. Yeah, but he could have raised Lazarus. I mean, this whole thing could have been prevented. So he's not weeping because Lazarus is dead. In fact, he's there because Lazarus is dead. He set this whole stage up. And the byproduct of that was all the pain and all the suffering and all this grief that people had, which tells us this is not heaven. This world is still broken. It needs a Savior to come in and redeem it. He's not crying for Lazarus. And he can't be crying for all of the sorrow that is around him. Because again, he could have stopped that too. You know why he's crying? He just told them, I'm the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. And they're like, yeah. Thank you for that. But nobody really sees that. And so here is Jesus, the one who made all things, the one in whom it says in Colossians, he is the fullness of the Godhead, and all things consist in him. The radiance of God's glory, the exact representation of his being. He's the one who is standing there amidst these people, the very Son of God, who left his throne of grace, takes on this form of man, and he's standing there in their midst, and they don't know really who he is. And all of that pain and all of that turmoil that's going on inside, they have no idea what it is that's about to befall them. Do you not get the same scene when Jesus was in Jerusalem on that eve of his crucifixion? When he looks over Jerusalem and he cries and he says, "Oh, Jerusalem, how I wish, like a mother hen who gathers her chicks, you would have come to me." But you would not. Here is the Son of Man making a declaration, "I am the resurrection and the life." And people just aren't getting it. And then he tells them to roll away the stone. Now, I know they didn't get it because their first response is, "No, you can't do that. He's been in there 4 days. Surely his body has begun to decay." But they roll away the stone, and he calls out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth." And suddenly, those tears of pain and sorrow they're exchanged now for tears of joy. Now, this whole atmosphere that was so distraught and burdened, now it's a party. And people are looking at each other and they're looking at Lazarus coming out of a tomb and they just can't believe it. All of that was set up by the Son of God and the Father, who said, "We're going to make a statement today that people are going to talk about for thousands of years." They're not going to name the name of Lazarus without also remembering that God raised him from the dead. Now, I have this quirky imagination, right? And I'm thinking, it says in the text that he came shuffling out, still wrapped in the grave clothes. And he told those next to him, "Take those clothes off of him and set him free." And I think, okay, you gave the guy new life. You couldn't give him a new set of clothes? I mean, like, if he's going to come out of the grave, man, why don't he just come out like, ta-da, like free, like, "Yo, look at me, man, I'm even skinnier. Look at me." And I thought about that too, and I thought, well, it was God's way of making sure that everybody got up and close and personal with Lazarus, and when they took off those bandages, they realized it was the same guy they put in that tomb. There were no more excuses. And when they wrapped him off, wondering, what is this guy going to look like? And now he is alive. Faith is vindicated. Hope is resurrected. Love conquers. And now God is calling you and I to enter into that story and see the ripple effect. Because God's going to come into your life and heal sometimes that broken heart or that troubled mind. There are times when God allows our bodies to heal, and we're so grateful. And he's going to say, if it's not just for you, it's for those around you. Why don't you go alongside them and take off some of those grave clothes and set them free? How about you walk out now with this word of a resurrection in the face of the most difficult situation people are ever going to face in their life, but you do it with the confidence to know that there is one who calls himself the resurrection and the life. And then tell me what kind of confidence that brings as you go through your life's journey, knowing that God has a purpose and a will, and he says, "I work all things together for the good of those who love me." That there is nothing in all of creation that could ever separate you from the love that is in Christ Jesus. And then he says, neither things present nor things to come. And I don't know about you, but that's all we have is the present and things to come. So he's saying, there is no way that you're outside of my hand. Now, I know it seems like that. But every time that happens, think about a little bit of that cumin and how nasty it tastes by itself. God's saying, I'm going to take all of your life and we're going to make something good. Because God works all things together for the good of those who love him. Let's pray. Father, I want to thank you for these stories that remind us again something of your majesty. They are meant to give us comfort, to help us to confront the obstacles of the day, help us to understand something of your way, and provide us with this certainty of faith. All reasons why we should place our hope in you. I pray for ears that are open to hear it. I pray for the eyes to see it, so that we leave that much more conformed into the image of the one who promises us life. And as always, we'll be careful to give you all the praise in Jesus' name.